computer. They tell me we are recording now, and we are covering this week. We are covering digital noise reduction. We're summarizing what we did in that unit, and then we will proceed ahead and push on to directional mics today. So both sets of those notes in front of you would be quite handy to have at this time. If I share screen here, and let's do that. And I'll close this a bit. Can you see that? That's a picture of, have you ever been to Iceland? That's a picture of Iceland. Just thought I'd show you. A couple of ponies, a couple of Icelandic horses there. Kind of cool. That's a wild place to go. Anyway, digital noise reduction. There are a few points in digital noise reduction that we went over last week, and I'll just mainly summarize them. It's very important to grasp the fact that digital noise reduction doesn't work as far as increasing speech recognition in background noise. Even though it's called digital noise reduction, really it's more of a subjective enhancement type of thing. It makes you feel better in the noise. But when noise is reduced, so is the speech, and we'll talk a little bit about that. In fact, we'll see if I can just go to the very end of this PowerPoint here and get to the very end and have a look at this. I'll show you something here. Here, this last slide here is showing you a picture of a many-channel hearing aid. Here's a frequency response of a whole bunch of a multi-channel hearing aid. Frequency along the horizontal, gain is shown along the vertical, and you can see the noise reduction that took place. Look at the letters of speech, and you can see that drawn with the thick black line, frequency response in this particular, it's just a fictitious hearing aid, just an imaginary hearing aid, but a frequency response with no digital noise reduction is the thick black line. And then, hey, okay, let's say each channel in this multi-channel digital hearing aid has digital noise reduction in it. Okay, so now there's background noise. And background noise is found at these frequencies, where I'm circling here, and at these frequencies, and at these frequencies. And so you can see the gain was reduced accordingly at those frequencies. Well, guess what? You've reduced the gain for the speech in those frequencies as well as the noise in those frequencies. So all you did was, reduce the gain in certain little channels, okay? Okay, that's better than doing this. Here's a one-channel hearing aid. There is no such thing as a one-channel digital hearing aid. But if the same thing was done in a one-channel digital hearing aid, frequency response with no digital noise reduction, and then frequency response with digital noise reduction, what's the difference between that and turning your volume down? Okay, this really, all you did was reduce. So you reduced everything, and you reduced the gain for the noise and for the speech. So when you have a many-channel digital hearing aid, it's better. I mean, at least it's better than doing this. So I'm reducing now things in smaller frequency ranges, and like just taking out a finger or two, okay, basically, instead of doing this. But still, I'm reducing whatever gain, whatever speech was in this finger, as well as whatever noise was in that finger, okay? And I guess that's the point I'm trying to make here. All right, so we can go back to where we were and just talk about summarizing this particular unit. There are various types of digital noise reduction out there. We said the first one was called spectral subtraction. We said the next one was called phase cancellation. And then we had another type called spectral enhancement. These three are the ones that we should really concentrate on. The last one, letter D, speech synthesis, don't worry about that one so much. That's a harebrained idea in somebody's head, but we need to concentrate mostly on those three. And if you look at those three, let's just describe them quickly in our PowerPoint, just so we have this. Whoops, not that PowerPoint, the other PowerPoint. Let's go to the other one. So let's choose this guy here. And we will go straight all the way home. Then we'll talk about the types. Spectral subtraction, phase cancellation, spectral enhancement, and don't worry about speech synthesis. Okay? Let's look at spectral subtraction. As we said last time, the spectrum of the speech and noise together is measured in a loud, let's say in a cafeteria. Someone's talking to you across the table, you're picking up the spectrum of speech and the spectrum of noise. Now remember to identify the word spectrum. Spectrum is always frequency on the horizontal, intensity on the vertical. Time is not represented on a spectrum. A spectrum just shows you what frequencies are in the sound. So, at a noisy place, the spectrum of speech and noise together is measured. And then, during pauses in the conversation, when I stop talking, now we're picking up the spectrum of just the noise between my sentences. The spectrum of the noise is estimated. And then the third step is the spectrum of speech plus noise minus the spectrum of just the noise would theoretically leave you with number 4, just the spectrum of the speech. But note the problem. The problem is that the noise spectrum is wide and so is the speech spectrum. They intersect with each other. So when you remove the noise spectrum, you've also removed the speech spectrum. So here's a picture of it. Here's a picture of 2 narrow bands of noise in yellow, like 2 ears sticking up. And you can see the red is the broad spectrum of speech. So here's number 1, the speech plus noise spectrum, both together. The noise is the little yellow ears sticking up. If they're narrow bands, that's cool, because watch this. I can take noise spectrum between pauses of speech. So here's the noise spectrum between pauses of speech, 2 little narrow bands looking like cat's ears. Well, if I subtract this from this, well, okay, I'm left with what the dotted line in red. Not bad. You still got quite a bit of speech spectrum there. You still have some. But the problem is, okay, the speech spectrum is broad and so is noise spectrum. So look at the speech and noise spectra in this slide. The speech in red and the noise spectrum in yellow. They're both broad. So here's the speech plus noise spectrum together. If I take this noise spectrum now and subtract it from here, I'm going to be left with the dotted line in red. Not much. You've thrown the baby in the bathwater. That's why the spectral subtraction method doesn't really work. The method was called phase cancellation. And that's what's commonly used in headphones. And mark my words, you are going to get clients in your office asking you, how come noise reduction in my Bose headphones works? And how come you can't put that in hearing aids? The phase cancellation doesn't work with spectra. Phase cancellation works with time waveforms. So look at this top waveform. What's the axes of a waveform? Time along the horizontal, amplitude along the vertical. Frequency is not really shown much here, okay? A waveform, as you know from acoustics, is different from a spectrum. A waveform includes time, so you're looking at the waveform over time. Frequency is in there, but it's hard to see. You'd have to calculate how many bumps took place per unit of time. Anyway, look at the time waveform on the top. If you take the time waveform on the top and add it to the waveform on the bottom, they're opposite in phase. So they will cancel each other out. Okay? So here's what happens in headphones. Phase cancellation is used in headphones. Why not in hearing aids? Because in headphones, the speech is sent directly to the eardrum from the headphone. The noise, however, is sampled by a microphone on the outside of the headphone. Digital hearing aids don't have this luxury because on their mic, both speech and noise are picked up together. So if you invert the phase, you've canceled everything out. So here's a picture of what we're talking about. The blue is the speech coming straight out of the headphone into the person's ear. The red is the competing background noise from outside. So let's say you're sitting in a plane and you're listening to a movie and there's lots of noise outside. So you've got the blue is the speech coming in, the noise is the red competing from the outside. Here's the mic now on the outside of the headphone. It's picking up the noise as well. And it inverts the phase. It flips it upside down and mixes it with the red. So you've canceled out. But the reason that can work is because the speech is coming from a separate place. The speech is coming straight from the headphone, whereas the noise is coming from outside, and the noise here picked up from outside is simply flipped upside down in phase. So the black and the red are now in opposite phase. The microphone flips the noise picked up by itself, flips it upside down, and so what's happening is you're getting this. Perfect, you're canceling out the noise. But as we said, in digital hearing aids, there's only a mic, and that mic is picking up the sound, and it's picking up both the speech and the noise. So you can't use that technique in hearing aids. It doesn't work. Here's the third method we went over last week. Digital algorithm detects spectral speech cues in noise. Now you're back to spectrum again. Excuse me. So now you're picking up the fundamental frequency of the voice, which is the lowest frequency. In a male, that's 125 hertz. In a female, that's about 250 hertz. In a baby, that's about 500 hertz. Okay? And then the harmonics of our fundamental frequency of the typical voice. And then it picks up vowel resonances, high frequency sibilants, the letter S, sibilants, and fricatives, Fs. So all the kind of sounds that are typical to speech. And when the digital algorithm inside the hearing aid recognizes speech-like sounds, well, then it emphasizes those. So instead of using noise reduction, it's using speech enhancement. You're trying to emphasize the speech qualities inside the sound coming in the mic instead of trying to decrease the noise. Okay, so deliberately, number 2 here, deliberately, first of all, recognize the spectral cues of speech, and then number 2, deliberately enhance or amplify these spectral speech cues. It's just a different approach from noise reduction. But the challenge for spectral enhancement is this: the high frequency consonants. And as you know, it's the high frequencies that are most important for telling you the differences between the words. Hat, fat, cat, bat, sat, all have and is loud and low. It's the that tells you what's what. Now look at the sound wave of speech. This might be, my father can beat your father at checkers. It's showing the sound wave over time of speech. And look at how much it fluctuates. But the point to recognize is that the loudest parts, follow my cursor, are the vowels. And the softest parts, the dips between the valleys, are the consonants. They're softest. So in noise, the valleys between the peaks are filled, and the peaks are thus less prominent. And the low frequency vowels, these peaks, they are still more intense, so they still stand out, and it's easier to enhance these. I'll show you. Here's noise. In noise, the valleys between the peaks are filled with it. So the peaks become less prominent, but they still are the low frequency vowels. They still stand out. So it's easier to enhance these because that's what's all left. The consonants are covered. So you can't enhance those because they're covered by the noise. You've just got the low frequency vowels that are sticking out. Well, why enhance those? The person can hear that anyway. So you're giving to the 1%. You're giving to the rich who don't need it anyway. So the spectral enhancement method doesn't really work either, because in noise, the most important parts of speech, the high frequency consonants, are buried in the noise. The high frequency sounds are the softest, and with noise, they're covered. So you're screwed. So don't worry about speech synthesis. Leave that one alone. What do we use today in today's digital hearing aids. Here's what we use. An amplitude modulation approach, AM. Think of AM radio, amplitude modulation. And read with me on this slide. AM approach, digital signal processing algorithms characterize the waveforms in each channel. Noise has a fairly flat waveform over time. Think of a fan or an air conditioner. The intensity is the same over time. However, speech, the waveform fluctuates rapidly. So if noise is sensed in a channel, the gain is reduced by some 5 to 25 dB, 5 to 20 dB. The speech enhancement approach, if speech-like characteristics are found in any channel, gain is increased in those channels. So both of these methods are used to some degree, but mostly the AM approach. So here's how it works. Amplitude modulation, the top waveform would be background noise. Air conditioner, fan, even the hubbub and babble, those words we use, hubbub, babble, hubbub, babble, 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 background cocktail party, background speech. If you were to take a waveform of background cocktail party speech, it would look fairly flat. The intensity would stay fairly stable over time. In other words, there wouldn't be much modulation. The word modulation means how much did the amplitude fluctuate over time. So if this is a minute or a second or what have you, 5 seconds, there's not much modulation taking place. The intensity of most noises is fairly steady over time. Whereas when you look at the bottom, that's speech close up. Now that's the person standing a yard away from you at the party, and you're trying to hear his or her voice. And that person's speech is a little bit louder than the background noise, but notably it fluctuates rapidly, and especially in quiet. I mean, when you're listening to my voice right now, you could say der Popstelt, okay, whatever you want to say. What do you call it in Japanese? Nihongo de hanashimasu ka? Doi tashimashite. Okay, any language you're talking, your amplitude is fluctuating rapidly, and that's mostly from someone close up or in quiet. But background noise, the amplitude mostly is fairly flat, and that's what digital noise reduction uses today. Look at this weird slide. This weird is another way of explaining the same thing. Look at the green bump. Think of that as a statistical distribution. And I'll stop sharing for just a second and just have it. Think about Mrs. Smith teaching a 4th grade class. Some of the students got A's. Some of the students got B's, some got C's, and some got D's. Okay, remember when you ever talk to teachers if they're grading on a curve? Here we go, look at the green. This would be how many students where my cursor is that got A's. Most students got B's. Lots of students got C's, a few students got D's. Okay, so you could call this the grade on the bottom, the horizontal, and then the vertical would be how many students got that grade. And you have what they call a bell curve. Oh, that's called a normal distribution. That's a typical 4th grade class, okay? That's the noise intensity distribution of noise. Most background noise, the decibels, SPL, will be at some level, right here. So we'll say, hey, yeah, 75% of the time, the noise of a fan or an air conditioner is at one particular intensity. And a little bit of times it's softer, and a little bit of time it's louder. But most of the time, the noise is at one steady intensity. Now look at the orange. That's the statistical distribution of speech intensity. And it's all over the place. Look at this ragged bump. So you can think about it this way. I'll go forward. You can think about it this way, Or you can think about it this way. Either one, you're telling the same story. The story is the amplitude of most noise is fairly steady and it's at one level over time. Whereas the amplitude of speech, of someone's flapping gums right now, that's all over the place. And that's the cue that digital hearing aids use for noise reduction. Here's another way of looking at the same thing, and you're going to notice this, whoa, when we start getting into real ear measurement, when you start looking at fitting hearing aids, and you're going to see the spectrum of speech. Now look at the spectrum of speech here. See how it's mostly in the low frequencies. Follow the solid line. First the solid. Most of the energy is over the lows and then slightly less energy over the high frequencies. That's typical. We've studied that 1,000 times, okay? But notice how the mean average is not in the center of the range. In other words, the range, the intensity of speech fluctuates like crazy, and it fluctuates about 30 dB over time. But note that the average intensity is not, repeat, not in the center of the range. Otherwise, this 12 would be 15, and that 18 would be 15, but it's not. There's a 30 decibel range of the intensity of speech over time, but the mean average is not in the center. And you know why? Because speech has such a weird statistical distribution of intensity. That's why. If the speech intensity was steady over time like noise, then the average would be sitting right in the middle. But it ain't. So this is always found on real ear measurement. When you do real ear measurement and you do speech mapping and you got someone's audiogram, I wish this thing would go away, this black, there, thank you, go away. Here's normal hearing. Okay, this is all plotted in dB/SPL. And normal hearing is this kind of this curve, as you know, and that when you're looking at normal hearing plotted in dB/SPL, it's a curve, okay? And in HL, of course, it's the straight solid line across the top of your audiogram. So plotted in dB/SPL going upward, normal hearing is on the bottom with where I'm tracing with my cursor. And then someone's hearing loss is plotted above. So you can see the person's got good or near normal hearing in the lows and worse hearing in the highs. You can see the asterisks, loudness tolerance. So you can see the person's dynamic range, this floor to ceiling, dynamic range. And look at the blue in the center. That is unaided speech. That blue is this here. Okay, you're looking at that plotted on real ear. So now you can counsel the client saying, hey, you know what, you can hear the vowels of speech because the vowels of speech are above your thresholds. But you can't hear the high frequencies of speech because those are below your thresholds. And the idea is to lift this up where it belongs. We've got to raise speech up so it's within your dynamic range. But my point here is also notice how the long-term average speech spectrum is not in the center of the range. It's 18 dB above the bottom and it's 12 dB below the top. So that same thing you're going to always see in real ear as well. And that's now you're realizing, or now we're explaining the reason why that is the case. And in one sentence, why? Because the intensity of speech fluctuates wildly over time, unlike noise, and so it does not have a normal distribution. It has an extremely weird looking distribution of intensity over time. All right, so we finished this section here, okay, with showing you what we just did earlier. There's no such thing as a one-channel digital hearing aid, because if we use digital noise reduction in a one-channel digital hearing aid, all we'd be doing is reducing the gain across the whole frequency response, and there's no difference between doing that and turning down your volume. So turning down your volume didn't reduce the gain for just the noise, it reduced the gain for everything. So many channels are used in a digital hearing aid. And the blue is showing you speech sounds that dropped. And the idea is to say, hey, let's just reduce the gain in channels where the noise is sensed. So if the noise is sensed in these frequencies where I'm drawing with my cursor, and in these frequencies, and in these frequencies, but not in the other frequencies, well, let's just reduce the gain in places where it needs to be reduced and leave the other frequencies alone. So you can see that the gain reduction in a many-channel hearing aid is better or more finely tuned than it would be in a single-channel digital hearing aid. And that's why digital hearing aids, one of the reasons why they have many channels, is to reduce the gain with digital noise reduction in more discrete places. But always remember, reducing the gain in any one channel or in any series of channels reduces the gain for not only the noise in that channel, but it also reduces the gain for the speech in that channel. That's the main point to look at. Digital noise reduction and directional microphones. Here's our transition slide, going into the second half of this morning's Zoom session. Digital noise reduction and D-mics. Noise reduction algorithms give subjective, heartfelt comfort to a client. They don't increase speech percent of recognition. Directional mics do give objective improvement in speech reception. And together they make a good team. One's the head, one's the heart. One's the science, one's the art. Together they make a good team. Essentially, that's the way to look at it. Okay, we'll stop sharing that particular puppy, look at our notes here, and make sure that we've covered what we wanted to. And your notes include exactly what we did. So now I can close that, and I can close this PowerPoint, and we'll go to the next one. And we're looking at our second last unit, directional microphones and how they work. So we'll make this a little bit larger to see. Here we go. Directional microphones. Always remember that there are two things clinicians need to accomplish for clients. Two things. And I'll even stop sharing to really highlight this. Hearing aids today don't just provide gain. Providing gain for the hearing loss is the obvious DUH, duh factor. I mean, obvious. The second thing we need to realize is that hearing aids need to improve the signal to noise ratio. The speech compared to the noise. And that's the trick, that's the rub, that's the difficult part to do. Adding gain across specific frequencies, cool, we can all handle that, but increasing signal to noise ratio is different. How do we provide different gains for speech than for noise? Well, digital noise reduction tries, and it's not really all that successful. So let's just look at digital directional mics. DNR cannot objectively improve speech recognition. We've seen that, and we've looked at that for the first half hour of today. Now, I could put on my glasses here. Directional microphones do indeed increase signal to noise ratio. Thus, they objectively improve listening performance in noise. Now, there's nothing digital about directional mics. Nor is there anything digital about receivers for that matter, okay? Remember, mics and receivers are opposite. Remember that mics and receivers are simply transducers. A microphone changes sound into electricity, and a receiver changes electricity back into sound. A frown is an upside-down smile, a smile is an upside-down frown. A mic is a backward speaker, a speaker is a backward mic. Okay? They're just transducers. So there's nothing digital about them. In fact, directional mics were used on analog hearing aids long before digital hearing aids emerged on the scene. Directional mics actually were invented by the US military in World War II. Okay? So they've been used for decades. We've put them on hearing aids both in the analog era and in the digital era. And by the way, do you know how to test the effectiveness of a directional mic? I'll show you something. Here's a hearing aid. And look at the receiver. Here's a little hearing aid with a receiver on it. And the microphone of this hearing aid is going to be at the top. And this would be a directional mic. And you know how to actually listen to a directional mic and tell how it's working? I'll show you something here. Here's a pair of stethoscopes to listen to a hearing aid. I'm putting that in my head, in my ears, and I'm taking the hearing aid and I'm pushing it inside, and I'm going to listen to the hearing aid. A directional mic, if I have the hearing aid turned backward, okay, like toward you and away from me, okay, I'm going to hear.
Okay.
But if I turn it this way, I'm going to hear it louder. Okay, I'll talk, da, 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 and I'll turn the hearing aid this way, the sound will get softer. If I turn it this way, the sound will get louder. That's the most effective, quick way to listen to a directional mic. What did you say, Tina? You were saying something to me. I couldn't hear you.
I just needed you to hold it up a little further. I couldn't see it.
Okay, fair enough. So that's the whole thing. You just turn it. Talk and turn the hearing aid. You turn it away from you, your voice should get slightly softer. You turn the hearing aid toward you, your voice, you should hear a difference. And that's honestly the most simple way to listen to the effectiveness of a directional mic. Plain and simple. All right, share screen again here. And let's look at how directional mics actually work. This is the cool thing. Now, we're beginning with a bit of verbiage here again. Speech and noise equals problems and noise. So I'll highlight this slide here and just to show you. Speech and noise plus hearing aids equals problems and noise. And we all know why. The reason why is because of hair cells. You've got to do two things for hearing loss. You've got to improve audibility and you've got to improve SNR. It's all about hair cells. And the damaged hair cells, these are normal. These would be damaged, normal, damaged. That's the reason why the person needs increased signal to noise. Here's the outer hair cells touching the tectorial membrane. They pull the membrane down so that the inner hair cell hairs can touch it and get bent. The outer hair cells healthy, seen here. Outer hair cells damaged, seen here. Perfect hearing on the left, looking like this. Impaired on the right, looking like this. This slide could be seen as a verbal analogy of this one and this one. We've all seen that before. Here's the outer hair cells actively sharpening the traveling wave. We now know how that actually happens and works. It's phenomenal. It really is. Okay, how they are embedded and they're pulling the membrane down so the hairs can get bent. The net effect of it is that the traveling waves are sharpened. You all remember this from anatomy class. So it's the sharpening in black. The outer hair cells are doing two things. They're amplifying the wave, making it taller, and they're sharpening it. So this person can distinguish between frequencies close together, whereas the person who with damaged outer hair cells just has the orange wave, the dull, rounded wave. And that person can't separate frequencies close together. That person can't separate speech from background noise as well. That person needs a deliberately increased signal-to-noise ratio. I can't change how the person's cochlea works. The black sharpening can never be brought back. We don't know how to do that. We can't replace outer hair cells. So the only thing we can do is deliberately try and make speech louder than the background noise. Try to increase the signal-to-noise ratio. Well, DNR didn't work. We saw that. So now we've got to look at directional mics. Here's another picture showing you the same thing. The sharpening being done by the outer hair cells. Look at the white traveling wave. This is the cochlea unrolled. High frequency hair cells would be on the right. Low frequency hair cells would be on the left. The dull, rounded traveling wave taking place without outer hair cells would happen all along this basilar membrane, but the outer hair cells sharpening the peak are doing two things, as it says above here, amplifying it, as you can see, and sharpening it. We can imitate the amplification function, but we can't do sharpening. We can't. And here's the summary slide. A healthy person with normal hair cells, the cochlea unrolled, Two frequencies close together are easily distinguished. Outer hair cell loss, the middle, you've lost the sharpening and the amplitude. Put a hearing aid on that person, you've accomplished goal number one. You've made the traveling waves bigger again, but you can't bring that sharpening back. So that's why this person needs an increased signal-to-noise ratio to better separate speech from background noise. Loss of the outer hair cells, it says here, dulls the traveling wave peak. Soft sounds are no longer naturally amplified. Loss of inner hair cells would cause even more damage. Mixed speech and noise would be sent to the brain. Hearing aids would simply make that mixed sound and noise even louder, but still not separating them. So hearing aids by themselves would do this. Impaired hearing would make it larger impaired hearing. This is better than this, but this here is simply doing this. I'm amplifying, and that's all we can do. We can't sharpen. We don't know how to do that. So we use directional microphones to get around the problem. You can't fix the problem. Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. Couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Well, let's find another way. Let's deliberately then increase the signal-to-noise ratio so the person with the damaged cochlea can separate the speech from the noise. And the method we use is directional mics. Directional microphones, as we said, objectively increase speech in noise performance. DNR, subjective. So how do, and this is the same slide you saw last time, how does it work? So digital noise reduction does not at this time objectively, reliably, statistically improve speech reception in noise. DNR does improve subjective listening comfort. So now let's look at, but on the other hand, if you can bring a hearing aid up to a speaker's lips, you've increased the signal-to-noise ratio. And this does improve speech reception in background noise. For example, FM systems. Isn't that exactly what they do? The teacher's wearing a mic, the student's wearing the hearing aid, they are wirelessly communicating with each other, so it's literally like bringing the hearing aid up to the teacher's lips. So you are increasing the signal-to-noise ratio. And a directional mic, the bottom line, it also increases, but to a lesser extent than an FM system. You could call a D mic a poor man's FM. Anyway, take a look at this slide and internalize it carefully. For normal hearing people, and I'll stop sharing for a second. For normal hearing people, if the speech and the noise are even-steven, the normal hearing person will understand about half of speech. So if the noise is 60 dB/SPL and the speech is 60 dB/SPL, there is a 0 decibel signal-to-noise ratio because they are even. I'm going to hear about 50% of the speech. If the speech is 70 and the noise is 60, there's a 10 dB signal-to-noise ratio. I'm going to get all of it. If the speech is 65 dB/SPL and the noise is 60, I'm still going to get all of it because there's a +5 signal-to-noise ratio. The magic number is 5. Okay? For normal hearing people, a +5 SNR gives you 100% speech recognition. A 0 decibel SNR gives you 50%. So if the noise is 70 and the speech is 70, I've got a 0 dB SNR. I'm going to hear about half of what you say. If the noise is 70 and the speech is 75, I've got a +5 dB signal-to-noise ratio. I'm going to hear everything you said. Let's go the opposite way. If the noise is 70 and the speech is 65, how now, brown cow? Now you've got a -5 dB signal-to-noise ratio because the speech is 5 dB softer than the noise. So if the noise is 70 and the speech is 65, I've got a -5 SNR. I'm not going to get jack. I'm going to hear nothing. And what's interesting to note is this. In soft noise situations, this is actual research done, okay? When the noise is 55 dB SPL, speech is typically spoken at about 60 to 61 dB SPL. That's like a 5 to 6 dB signal-to-noise ratio. Let's say the background noise increases from 55 to 65. Now the noise is 65. Guess what speech is usually spoken then? About 68. That's a 3 dB signal-to-noise ratio. It becomes harder. You're still going to get it, but it's harder. Now get this. Now the noise increases to 75 dB SPL. Guess what? Spoken speech is often in competition about 74. Now you're at a -1 dB signal-to-noise ratio. So people try to increase the loudness of their speech as the noise increases, but the increase of the speech doesn't catch up really. It's not really fair. People try harder, but it's always harder to listen in background noise. So anyway, back to where we were. Now, so look at this slide here. Okay, speech and noise, if they're similar in intensity, that's a 0 dB SNR, you're going to understand about half. Now look at what happens with mild to moderate sensory neural loss. An additional 5 dB is required for the person to get 50%. The magic number is around 5. So for a normal hearing person, if the noise is 60 and the speech is 60, I'm going to understand half. For the hearing impaired, if the noise is 60 and the speech is 65, now that person's going to get 50%. They need an additional 5 dB SNR. So right here, an additional 5 dB SNR is required for the person to get 50% of the speech. Whereas for normal hearing, when they're even Steven, the person will get 50%. So for normal hearing, 0 dB SNR gives you 50%. Mild to moderate loss plus 5 dB SNR gives you 50%. What's that person going to need to get all of it? Probably a 10 dB SNR. Whereas the normal hearing person required a plus 5 SNR to get 100%, the hearing impaired require more. So each additional 1 dB SNR can result in up to 10% speech improvement. So it behooves of us to increase the SNR by only a few dB. Directional mics try to increase signal-to-noise ratio by about 5 dB. But in real life, directional microphones increase SNR by 2 to maybe 3. And that's okay, Jack. Because if each dB results in a 10% speech improvement, well, 3 times 10 is 30. That's not bad. That's pretty good. You're getting some substantial improvement. And even if you cut the 10% in half, let's think really negatively. The directional mic improved the SNR by 2 dB. And, well, you've only, for each dB is like 5% speech improvement. Well, 2 times 5 is 10. 10% is still something to be recognized. It's better than nothing.
Is this a set range? Is this a
Pardon?
set range within the microphone? Or is it something that you can actually program within the hearing aid program?
No. All directional microphones work along a similar principle, and you can do speech testing to measure what the general effect of it was. But what you're going to typically notice with directional compared to non-directional, you're going to notice about a 10 to 20% speech improvement. That's about, just roughly speaking. But what you can change in directional microphones, and you're asking a good question, what you can change is their field of pickup. It's called their polar plot. You can change the shape of their sensitivity. You can make it like a heart. You can make it look like a figure 8. You know, so we'll be talking more about that next week. So, but you are ahead of the game there. That's actually, you can,
Okay.
yes. Let's look at the Sigma Pure Tone Average, Parent-Teachers Association, as it gets worse and worse and worse. And look at the SNR required as your hearing loss gets worse and worse and worse. And you can see that past 50 or 60, now you're getting inner hair cell damage, because outer hair cell damage causes a 50 to 60 dB sensory neural loss. Now you're getting inner hair cell damage. Look at how the required signal to noise ratios increased by degrees. And that's why when someone has a severe hearing loss, like here shown on the left, directional microphones are no longer any good. They're not going to help the person much. That person's going to need an FM system, or that person's going to need a separate microphone worn by you, the person who's sitting across from him or her, so that he or she can get Bluetooth pickup with their hearing aid, okay? That person's going to need more than a directional mic. Directional microphones are very good for people with mild to moderate sensory neural loss. Why? Because directional microphones can improve signal to noise ratio by only a few decibels. They can't improve signal to noise ratio by 12 to 18 dB. Impossible. So that's why directional mics are great for mild to moderate loss. Directional hearing aids. What do you mean we're lost? I thought you bought a directional hearing aid. Okay? They don't help you find the directions, nor do they help you find direction of sound. Directional microphones. Let's emphasize this right here. They are no more sensitive. Pardon?
A directional mic won't help lateralize where the sound is coming from at all?
No, they won't. Here's how directional microphones work. Let's say you're facing me. The directional microphone is going to be equally sensitive to a regular microphone to sounds coming from the front. It's going to be the same. If I'm wearing a regular mic or a D mic, it's going to be equally sensitive to you in front of me. The only thing about a D mic is that it is less sensitive to sounds coming from the sides and rear. Okay? Equally sensitive to sounds from the front, less sensitive to sounds from the sides and the rear. To share screen here, I'll show you just where we're going next week when we show you a polar plot, okay? So let's just show you that so we can see it. Here, whoop, up there, up, Ted. Here you go. So here's a directional mic. Directional mic might be the green, the black, or the red. An omnidirectional mic is the blue. So look at the 0. Let's say that's the front. A directional mic is just equally sensitive to a regular mic, to sounds coming from the front. The thing about D mics is they are less sensitive to sounds coming from the sides and the rear. So this type of a mic will not help you lateralize the direction of sound. It's going to help you hear better in noise. Hopefully, it's assuming that the speech is coming from in front of you and the noise is coming from the sides, okay? If the noise and background noise is coming from all around, and the directional microphone is going to be less sensitive to sounds from the sides and the rear. Hopefully, thus, improving the signal-to-noise ratio, because it's now like a tunnel. It's focusing on sound from the front. It's a very good question to ask, and I'm very glad people do ask it. We're going to reinforce that next time, but let's look at how they work, and then we'll get out of here. Here's a regular mic. A regular mic. Sound comes in from over here, the port, comes in through the doorway. So follow my cursor. Sound comes in, and then it wiggles this diaphragm. And the wiggling of that diaphragm creates an electrical current. Now, a directional mic has 2 doors, a door in the front and a door in the rear, and yet it has 1 mic. But notice at the back door, there's a filter. There's something jammed in there. So let's look at what happens as a result. In a microphone on the left, sound has to move a diaphragm. So here's sound coming from a source, and it's wiggling the diaphragm. Now look at the right. If sound simultaneously hit the diaphragm on both sides, there's cancellation. It won't move. So let's look now at how directional microphones work. In any mic, sound moves a diaphragm, as you can see here in this slide. Well, sounds hitting both sides would cancel each other out. Directional microphone, when sound comes from the front. So here's a D mic now. Look closely at how it has a front door and a back door. Okay? So now sound is coming from the front, and it's going to enter the front door. Look at the little white lines here. Sound is coming in the front door, and it wiggles the diaphragm. The rest of the sound moves on. Cool. Now, let's watch it in animation. Notice again, the microphone has two doors, a front door on the left, and the rear door has something jammed in it. Okay, watch this now. Sound comes from the front and wiggles the diaphragm, and then carries on. God's in his heaven, all's well with the world. Okay, now look what happens when sound comes from behind. When sound comes from behind, it gets canceled out because it's going to hit both sides of the diaphragm. Watch this. Follow the little white lines here. Sound coming from the rear gets slowed down by the filter jammed in the back door. Meanwhile, the rest of the sound carries on, goes around, and comes in the front door. And look, there's cancellation. Let's follow it in animation. Watch this. Sound comes from the rear. It gets slowed down by that filter, and by the time sound comes from the front, there's cancellation. The diaphragm doesn't move. Now, let's just look at that again. Look at sound from the front as well. Okay? Sound coming from the front. Enters, moves the diaphragm, cool. Sound coming from the rear. This is showing you a whole slide. Now we're showing you the animation. Comes from the rear, slowed down by the filter, so that by the time they meet, there's cancellation, and that's why a D mic is less sensitive to sounds from behind. Always remember, and this slide is just showing you a white picture of all those steps. That's all it's doing for your own printout in case you felt like printing it, okay? That's where we're going to stop today. Directional microphones do improve signal-to-noise ratio by a few decibels, 2 to 3 in real life. In a lab situation, in an anechoic chamber, they might improve signal-to-noise ratio by 5 dB. But guess what? People's heads are not shaped like this polar plot that I'm showing you here. People's heads aren't shaped like that. Look at my head. It's 10 pounds of ugly fat, okay? You're going to get head shadow effects. You're going to get all kinds of stuff mucking around in there. So this nice little round polar plot showing here is in a lab. Sure, the hearing aid's on a turntable, and it's moving, and you got speakers all around, and blah, blah, blah. In real life, a directional microphone will improve signal-to-noise ratio by 2 to maybe 3 dB, but that's important because each of those stinking little decibels improves speech recognition by several %. And you've got 3 times 5%, let's say, that's a 15% improvement. Not bad. Better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick. Okay, so it's not, you know, we got to look at these things realistically. D mics do help, but always remember the way to actually listen to a directional mic is to take the hearing aid and listen to the hearing aid and simply turn it around. Just turn it around. And are you experiencing a difference in the loudness of the gain of the hearing aid? And if you're not, the directional mic isn't really working very well. You should hear sort of a wow effect. In other words, you should put the hearing aids on your client and have your client stand in one place and you walk around the client and talk to the client from the front And then stand behind the client and talk to the client. The client should notice a difference in the loudness of your voice. By not that much, just a few dB, but they should notice a difference. All right, I think we're good for today. We'll finish off this section on directional mics next week. And then we have only one more week to go, and that's on good old ADRO, Adaptive Dynamic Range Optimization. Now, there's a mouthful. All right? Anyway, we'll stop here. And I have recorded this session, at least I certainly hope so. And we'll talk to you next week, okay? All right.
Bye.
See you later. Bye-bye.